Here. Can you hear me back? Oh, yeah. I can hear me. Hi, my name is Melinda Gallo. I work at 4D in Paris as a Wakanda project manager and technical writer. I'm also here with Erwan, who's going to be coming up later to answer any questions. In this session, I'm going to be doing an overview of a lot of things. The widget architecture, which is basically the HTML markup of our widgets, the widget API, using jQuery on our Wakanda widgets, the ability to extend the widget API framework so that you can create your own functions, also to create widgets dynamically, so when they're not on the page, you can actually create them in JavaScript, and the developing your own widgets, which in JavaScript as well, which you can put into multiple Wakanda projects if you'd like, and also using a third-party plugin or widget to integrate it into Wakanda. So you can also use it into any of your projects. I'm first going to go over the widget architecture. So basically, all of our widgets are in div tags, which I'll show you in Wakanda. And then we use some of the other HTML native tags for some of our widgets. So let me go into Wakanda, sorry. I'll make sure that's up. So let me go back. Oops. So in Wakanda, we have a selection of widgets that you can use to create, basically for all of your needs for a Wakanda application. And so I'll just show you briefly the source code of our widgets, just so you can see. So as you can see, we have a text input, which has an ID of rich text 2, which is a div as well as a data grid. Then we have a text input widget, which is actually a native input HTML tag. And then we have label as well, which is a native tag. So I was going to run this page. Actually, I already have this page open in my browser, just to show you quickly. Sorry, page. So, So I was going to show you we have our widget API. I wanted to show you the documentation really quickly, because we already documented the widget API. So basically, we have all the common properties for our widgets, which are config, DOM node, etc. And then at the bottom, we have a set of our functions. And as you can see, some of our widgets have their own specific functions that you can use. So I'm just going to show you really quickly. So what I wanted to show you is actually, we have a specific syntax for our widgets when addressing them. So we have our standard syntax in Wakanda to get the object, which is the first syntax that you see there. As you can see, we were kind of inspired by jQuery. So our syntax looks a little similar. The difference is that in Wakanda syntax, we're actually retrieving the object, and in jQuery, we're getting the DOM node. So I wanted to show you what that looks like in the Firebug debugger. Sorry, I keep switching screens. I only have one machine. So I'll look at the data grid. So this is the object that is actually returned from our syntax. As you can see, we have the functions just as I showed you in the documentation. And if we went back and we looked at I hope you can read this. We actually have so this is jQuery syntax. And here is the DOM node. Oops. Open that up. So as you can see, it's the entire div tag that basically defines our data grid, as you can see here. So, I want to show something else. So basically, we can use any of our, so actually I use this a lot, the WEF widgets syntax, because sometimes I don't remember the name of my widgets. So here, for example, I can use any of the Widget API functions. Once I do so, actually, I can render this. Oops, let me get a hold of it. So I can make it draggable. This is just a part of the whole Widget API. The other interesting part of our Widget API is that normally a function works only on a specific widget. And because of our data sources and how they're dynamically set up, so that if we define a data source for one widget, I'll show you. So we define the data source here for our data grid. I also define the same data source, which is company, for the text input. Same is true for the radio group and the combo box. So I have all of them have the exact same data source attached to them. So that when I come back into Firebug, I can actually set the value. So right now it's set to California. Oops, let me get this here. So right now it's set to California. So I'm going to set this input widget, which is actually the same data source as you saw earlier, as my grid, my radio button, and my combo box. So once I set that, all of those are going to be set to Oregon, as you could see. So that the one modification in my input, my text input widget, was actually sent to all of my other widgets that were listening onto the same data source. So it's the only difference in one of the interesting things of the Widget API, among others. But so the Widget API is generally you can set properties, get properties, and styles that you already set in the GUI designer. So if you wanted to do some other, let's see. Oops. So this is basically what the widget looks like. This is our WAF widget class, which is at the top. I have my cursor. And at the bottom, you'll see the other, I just put 3 widgets. So we have the grid, button, and combo box. So all of the ones in black are everything that comes from our widget class. Now, they're all inherited by each of the widgets, which in itself are each classes. So the grid class, button class, and combo box. The ones in blue, like center row, and the add option, remove option, are actually specific to those widgets. So as you can see, they're not in any of the other widget classes. So the button doesn't have add option, remove option, for example. You can also use jQuery on our widgets using the jQuery syntax. So you can add or remove attributes to the HTML tag because you're working directly on the DOM node. You can modify styles directly, like either the class or actual fonts, etc. And you can also use animation. So in this jQuery example, I just decided that sometimes when we have a grid, we have this scroll bar that appears at times with our data might be too big for the column. And so using jQuery, I can actually hide that scroll bar, the horizontal scroll bar. I can actually show it again, but I can hide it. Another feature is that by default, we have these sort indicators in our data grid. And right at the moment, we can't change those in our GUI designer. But like I said, anything that you see, you can actually modify either by our API if it exists, if the function already exists, or by jQuery, so working directly on the DOM node to change the HTML that's been rendered on your page. So here I'm going to just hide the sort indicators and show them. I'll show you that quickly in jQuery. So this was my page. And so for the hiding the sort indicators, we basically are getting the data grid, which is our actual DOM node, and on this class, which is the WAF sort, which is the class that contains those 2 sort indicators, we're just doing a hide. So it's just one line of code. For the other section where we did the hide scroll bars, it's actually we're working directly on the CSS and setting this overflow attribute, overflow X attribute, which is the horizontal one, to hidden. So I'm going to go back and show you the other example. So in our Widget API, we have a function called toggle that allows you to hide and show a specific widget. So we can just hide and show it. In jQuery, they have many functions that allow you to use other animation features. So I can actually fade toggle, so I can have my widget come in and out as a fade instead, or I can actually do a slide. So they're just different ways of doing the same thing. Although on ours, as you'll see in the code in Wakanday, so in our widget API, we're using our Wakanday widget object, the syntax, and our command toggle. For jQuery, we actually have to go, obviously, to the DOM node, which we're using jQuery syntax, and doing a fade toggle, or in our other case, slide toggle. So sometimes people want something a little fancier. So we also have jQuery UI, which is pre-installed in our WAF. So basically, actually, I'm going to show you the list of some of the libraries that are installed by WAF automatically. We actually have used jQuery because it's at the core of most of our widgets. The jQuery UI we've used for the slider and combo box. So in this one, I'm just going to show us a couple of different effects. So we have like the explode effect, so we can explode a widget on screen. Pulsate, which some people use for maybe an alert. I'll show you the code. So the only code we wrote is this. I won't show you the callback. The callback is just to put it back on screen so I can redo another example. So basically, I just sent to using our jQuery syntax. So get it using the DOM node and calling effect, which is a jQuery UI function. The effect chosen, which was whichever one I chose, was pulsate, explode, and then basically in one line of code was able to do the exact same thing that JavaScript would do. So if you don't want to use any of those existing libraries, you can actually create your own functions. So in our documentation, we have the list of the existing libraries and plugins that are loaded by WAF. So as you can see, we have jQuery. We actually write the version number so that you know if you're ever going to write your own function or plugin, actually widget, you don't want to install a more recent version of jQuery. We're trying to keep as up to date as we can on ours, but we have a lot of work to do when we modify another version. The other libraries we use mostly for our other widgets, but we also have the jQuery UI iPad plugin, which helps us with our mobile development. And we have one called Beauty Tips, which I'm going to show you in a second. The Tiny MCE was used for the WYSIWYG editor, so our text editor. Oops. So actually, I was going to show you quickly the Beauty Tips. Can be a little slow because I have my Firebug open. The Beauty Tips jQuery plugin, we're actually using ourselves right here to display the picture when we have a grid. So in Wakanday, I actually created a client-side JavaScript file, which I called application.js. And in it, I'm using the beauty tip function. So I created a function that's actually, so I'm extending my class widget. So I'm adding this function to all my widgets so that all of them can use it. So I have my set beauty tip message. So I send a text, and it's going to display in that same window, just like the picture did earlier. And then I have another function that I created that I'm actually extending the button class this time. So it'll only be available for our button widget. And it's called call button alert. And in that, I'm going to send a title. And after that, just which button was clicked on. So first, once I've created this file, which actually I'll show you where, show you where I put it. It's in my web folder, which is how we define what is a client-side JavaScript file and what isn't. So if it's in our project, it's going to be, so the model.js is a server-side JavaScript, but anything in that web folder is a client-side JavaScript file. So here I've included that file, my application.js. And then when I go into my script, so in my onload, I'm applying that beauty tip message to 3 of my widgets so that I just have a kind of a help tip message that appears. And then on my previous and next button, I'm basically just calling my button alert function. It's pretty simple. So here, as you can see, here is my select state, my beauty tip message that appears. And then when I click my next button, my alert comes up. So what's interesting about that is I can actually add this to any of my widgets on the fly even. So I'll add it to my text field. As you can see, it comes up along with all of the widget API functions. So I'll just write this. Can you see that okay? Oops, sorry. So then it appears here. Pretty straightforward. So as you can see, this is how it works. So in my widget class, as I showed you before, I'm actually adding that the red function is the new one that I created, which extends my widget class, which is then brought into all of my other widgets. And my call button alert is only in my button class. It's kind of just a reminder. Okay. So you can also create a widget dynamically. So as you can see, I'm going to be creating two buttons. One button is going to be here in this section, and the other button will be down here, which is going to be a previous button. So in Wakanda, I can actually show you the code first for one of the buttons. So in my first button, I actually have my HTML element that I'm going to create. So the first example was actually in JavaScript. I actually prefer it in jQuery because it's very clear that I'm actually going to be building a button tag. Now, if this were a different type of widget, like a grid or combo box, it would be in a div tag, so I would have div instead of button. Then I have to pass my ID. So this entire HTML section is actually the visual aspect of my button that I'm going to be creating. So my new button, which is my ID, is actually going to be used later to reference the button widget instance that I'm going to be creating. So then I define the style, so basically where it's going to be positioned, my size, and then classes. In the class, I've actually added also my own class, which is actually a widget skin that I can create in Wakanda automatically, which I can then use that skin on any widget of the same type. And then I just add my button tag into my HTML document. Then I create my instance in JavaScript. So I create an instance of my button widget using the exact same ID. And in this case, I only needed to put the title. And after that, I added a listener to it, just that on my click event, I'm going to have an alert that appears. Let me show you how that works. So this is my page. So here is my button, and here is the alert that I built earlier. In the other example, I actually have, let me show you. So I have a next button. So in this next button, I have my company source, which is the same as my grid. The automatic action that it has is next. So it's going to go to my next entity in my grid. So it'll just scroll down. And then just the title of my button, which is next. In the code. So for this button to create it, I first normally would need to create the data source, but since it's already been created, I don't need to redo it again. But generally, to create a data source is as simple as 4 lines of code. Actually, ends up being 1 line of code. So just the ID and the binding, which is actually the name of the data store class. So once again, I create my button, define where it's going to be, insert it into my HTML page, and then I create the instance of my widget button. So here, of course, I put in the exact same thing. I'm putting in my title, the automatic action, which in this case is previous, and then binding it to the same data source, which is company. And if I were creating my data source, I would have to resolve it at the end. So in our Firefox, so here I have my typical next button. Now I create my previous. So it's as simple as writing a few lines of code. Now, sometimes that may not be enough. You might want to create your own widget. So we actually wrote a manual on how to write, on how to create your own widget in Wakanda. And it's all in detail, so I only wrote a few things up here. So first you need to get the template, which is a folder from Wakanda Studio. Define the configuration for your widget, which is going to define the properties that you're going to allow your users to set in the GUI designer. So not only properties, but also events and styles that you can modify when you have it displayed on the browser. And then you write your widget's JavaScript code, which is basically inserting an HTML, basically inserting the HTML of your widget onto the page. So first I'll show you where you get this. So this template folder, just as a quick reminder, so this is the contents of my server. And in it we have a widget folder, and every widget that we have already available in Wakanda has its own folder. So this is the template, just so you can see how it works. Let me open up the template. So this is the configuration file. So it's going to basically be the guidelines to how you're going to create your widget. So everything is there. You just need to change the values for yourself. And I'll show you in our widget. So when working in Wakanda, what I wanted to do was I wanted to have a way to, I'm going to have to rebuild my page, was a way to have a hyperlink. At the moment, I can actually display my URL, or I can display my email, but I didn't have a way to make it a live link. So we created a hyperlink widget, which actually obviously works. So now I can, those are updated automatically through my data source. So as you can see, I have my hyperlink widget, which I've placed in my miscellaneous controls section in Wakanda. This is where I've installed it. And here are the properties that I've defined. So the first two are standard and default in Wakanda. So obviously I have my ID, the hide widget on load, and then I have my source. Let me show you the configuration file. So as you can see, here's my category, miscellaneous controls. This image is the icon that you're going to see here. And then I have my properties. So I have the data binding, which is my source, which is an internal property in Wakanda. Then I have my own properties. So I just realized something. I just realized I had my other version up. Good. I'm actually going to show you something, but it didn't. Okay. Data ref, my data targets. We obviously have also different types of objects that you can define for your users to give them easier access, like the blank. Instead of allowing them to just insert underscore blank or underscore self, we give them. You can actually use a drop-down menu to do that. Then we have the link text, etc. Now this data label property is internal to Wakanda, and actually Wakanda will manage this for you. So, because in this instance we actually have a label, when you go to the styles area, you actually have this specific option so that you can modify this label, which is actually a label widget, which I showed you earlier, which is a label tag in HTML, so that you can modify this. So there was no code involved in creating that. And as you can see with the company, I have no label, so now the label option is not available. I'm just going to quickly go through this. We have our events as well, which you'll see here, the exact same events. These are just the standard mouse events that we have. And then, of course, at the end, we're defining which styles we want to show our users that we can allow them to use. And basically, this is just how it's going to be rendered on the design. Now there's only two files that you need when we're building a widget. So the second file, the second file is the constructor. So this is what's going to build our widget on screen once it's being sent to the browser. So what I wanted to show you quickly was how to actually add another attribute or another property here in our properties panel. So I'll just quickly add another property. Actually, I'm going to copy this. So I'm going to add draggable, which is a property we have for other widgets. So let's see. So I have to do this in the server. All right, and the studio. This is where we install it in two places. Actually, and here I already wrote my code, so that once that property, if the user clicks it and so it's going to be true, I actually use our function draggable to make it draggable when you have it on screen. So here's our option. Actually, I'll do it on that one. So now once I reload my page, now my widget is draggable. So you can see that was a very easy way to just add a property in. And also what's interesting about our widget structure is that you can actually define if you're going to install these widgets just on desktop or on desktop and mobile. As you can see, we have other widgets that I'm going to show you a little bit later, which, so we have other external widgets that we have available that we created. And if I go to my smartphone page, I actually have my hyperlink widget, but I have no others after that. So my external, all the widgets that you saw after external are actually not available. And if I go to iPhone, they actually work just like you would expect them to. So it's standard. Let me go back to slides. So the last part, you can actually take an existing third-party plugin or widget. Maybe you're using a framework already, or you like a widget that you have and you want to include it into Wakanday. It's pretty simple to do. You basically need to learn how the HTML markup for your widget, generate the HTML in the widget's constructor, which was basically that JavaScript code to generate the HTML to be displayed on the page, and then defining the properties, events, and styles that you want your user to modify in the GUI designer. So I'm going to show you, whoops, that was good. So basically we took, no, we didn't. We basically went to this jQuery plugin, Slides.js, and we decided we wanted to create a widget. Because we could have just taken the markup and put it onto our page, but we decided we wanted to have it so that we could actually use it in multiple projects and maybe give it to somebody else to use, put it on GitHub so other people can use it. So first we had to look at how the markup was, and generally most third-party plugins are pretty well documented that you can figure out how it works so you can display this yourself. So in Wakanday we actually, so here is the Slides plugin widget, and again we have our first two standard HTML, our two standard Wakanday properties, and then we've defined all these other properties. This is actually a grid, so there's usually just one and you can add multiple. So we created these other properties here. We used our standard events and then the styles. So the title down here is actually linked to this. So I can actually, as you can see, even on my GUI designer, modify that. So that once we're in, basically it renders like this. And it works just as it does as a JavaScript plugin. And then there are other people who manufacture widgets. So there's also, this year we met Widgmo and Can-Do-UI as well. And both of them have a large selection of widgets that you can actually integrate. Both of them are based on jQuery, which is the same as us. So here we have our Widgmo widgets. So this is the grid that we have. And again, we've defined all of these properties. It even has its own events that we use their native events, which I'll show you in a minute. And the styles. And in the styles, we actually were able to use specific parts of the widget. As you can see, they're even selected for you in the GUI designer. We also have a slider, too, which we also created. And in it, we're actually using 2 of the native events. So as you can see, this is on the employee salary data source, as is our text input. So I'll show you how these work. So here's our Widgmo example. Let me just reload it. With Firebug, unfortunately, it's a little slow at times. So here we have the data that we saw earlier, the exact same company data source. Oh, there we go. And here we have the slider. So here I just put up an alert for my start and my end, just so you know that we're actually working dynamically with them. And that value is updated automatically. And just as a reminder, these are all, now that we've integrated them into Wakanda, they're actually a part of our widget class. So I can actually go in. Whoops. So I can get my slider. And I can use my beauty tip again, my beauty tip message function. If I remember to put my, so when I come here, I have my function that appears as well. As our last example, we have the Can-Do-UI widget. And this as well is just another example of integrating a jQuery widget directly into Wakanda. So this is just kind of a summary of everything that I've shown you. So we went over a little bit of the widget architecture of how each widget is actually an HTML tag. Our widgets API that allows you to set and get properties and styles for each of the widgets. jQuery, as well as jQuery UI that you can use on any of the Wakanda widgets, which is basically you're going to be working on the DOM node that's displayed on screen, either on your tablet, smartphone, or desktop. Extending the actual widget class to create your own functions, which can be used either in the entire class or a specific widget class, to create widgets dynamically that you haven't already created on your page with the GUI designer. Developing your own widgets in JavaScript and then using third-party widgets or plugins to integrate into Wakanda. As you can see, our architecture is pretty open, that you can pretty much do anything you want. So you see how powerful it is to just easily and dynamically create widgets or extend classes to have your own functions that you can add in other ways. And also, because of the way they're built, you can actually later, we're working on installation, but basically you just need to give somebody, so I have my hyperlink widget, so this is all that I needed. That was the icon for it, but the configuration and constructor files, and that's pretty much all you need to have to create your widget and to put it into multiple projects. And actually, in this case, I'm actually installing it directly at the moment into the studio and server. So any project I open up with this version of Wakanda will actually have that available to you. So if you have any questions, we also have Erwan who's going to come up too.
Thanks. Melinda, is there any plans for like a widget manager, a library system?
That's what you're working on.
Oh, sorry. So is there any plans for a library, or like a widget manager, so that I could check out widgets from somebody else or look up other people's widgets? Or do you follow what I'm saying?
Ah, pardon. C'est un moyen d'installer les widgets avec une librairie.
We are working on a. Can you hear me? Okay. We are working on a way to manage this kind of installation because actually, as it's manual installation, but it's all the way you install a widget is documented on our documentation. So, but we are working on a way to automatically install a widget. For example, if we want to have a repository of widget on GitHub, for example, and directly install a widget by using a studio. I mean, for example, we are in Wakanday studio, and I want to get a widget that is stored on a GitHub repository. And we are working on a way to directly install this kind of widgets directly on Wakanday.
I was just wondering, how frequently is the GitHub repository for the widgets and the WAF updated? And I guess part of the reason I'm asking is for if someone were wanting to submit some changes or improvements. Is that something that's actively monitored and is it updated?
Je suis pas sûre, moi.
Je peux répondre à ma place?
Je sais pas, moi.
You mean, what exactly you mean by, I didn't get it.
Like, because the WAF is up on GitHub, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And is that the most recent version? Is it the...
C'est la dernière version de WAF, là, sur GitHub. I think so. I think we're, yeah. So the latest version is up for the moment.
Okay.
I don't know how often they're going to be updated. I mean, maybe with our releases.
Yeah, like I'm not a GitHub expert, but when I went on what I thought was the GitHub repository there, I didn't, maybe I'm reading it wrong, I didn't see a ton of activity, so I wasn't sure if that's, maybe I've got the wrong
Yeah, I'm
place
not sure
going.
who actually is updating the GitHub at the moment. I saw someone else who had a question. Ah.
We have seen a standalone widget. Can interact any widget with each other?
Yes, you can.
There's no limit.
We can
in
use
this way. I've seen also an installation of one single button. Is there any limit? I mean, one widget can contain itself in other.
Yes, for example, our widget can contains other widget. For example, we have a chart widget, yes. And a chart widget is a set of some of our widgets. So you can define a widget as a set of a widget, and you can have an interaction between this widget. For example, on our example, we show you that some widgets are bind to data source. And for example, when data source is updated, for example, the event is sent to all the widgets. So all the widgets can update their data because the data source is updated and send the event to the widgets.
Okay, thank you.
Is there another question?
Good. Okay, well, thank you very much. Have a good day.